Sometimes the most powerful moments happen when no one expects them. On a crisp autumn morning in 2023, hidden cameras captured something extraordinary that would change how the world sees young royalty forever. What started as a routine school day for 8-year-old Princess Charlotte became the moment she earned a title that no royal protocol book could have prepared her for: the Warrior Princess. This isn't just another royal story. This is about courage, standing up for what's right, and how one little girl's brave actions rippled across the globe, inspiring millions of children to find their own inner strength. From the silent halls of Lambrook School to international headlines, witness the true story of how Princess Charlotte faced her greatest challenge, not in a palace, but in a school playground. The royal guard who watched it all unfold would later say it was the moment he realized he wasn't just protecting a princess. He was witnessing the birth of a leader. What happened next would prove that sometimes the smallest person in the room can cast the biggest shadow. This is that story. Real, raw, unforgettable. The morning mist clung to the grounds of Lambrook School like a protective blanket, but for 8-year-old Princess Charlotte, protection felt like the last thing on her mind. She adjusted her navy blue school blazer for the third time, her small fingers trembling slightly as she walked through the grand entrance doors. Behind her, at a respectful distance, walked Detective Inspector James Morrison, her assigned Royal Protection Officer. He had been watching over Charlotte for 2 years now, but today something felt different. Charlotte's blonde hair was pulled back in the regulation school ponytail, and her bright blue eyes held a mixture of determination and uncertainty that Morrison had come to recognize. She was the middle child of the Prince and Princess of Wales, sandwiched between her older brother George, who seemed to glide through royal duties with natural ease, and little Louis, who charmed everyone with his mischievous grin. Charlotte often felt like she was searching for her own place in the grand scheme of things. Morrison kept his distance as protocol demanded, but his trained eyes never left the young princess. He had seen her through scraped knees, friendship dramas, and the occasional royal tantrum. What he hadn't seen yet was the fire that was about to be ignited within her. The first sign of trouble came during morning assembly. Morrison positioned himself near the back of the hall, his presence barely noticed by the students but providing him a clear view of Charlotte sitting in the third row with her classmates. The headmaster, Mr. Patel, was speaking about kindness and respect when Morrison noticed a group of older students in the row behind Charlotte exchanging whispered comments and stifled giggles. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see Charlotte's shoulders tense. Her hands, which had been folded neatly in her lap, slowly clenched into small fists. Morrison's instincts kicked in, and he subtly moved closer, weaving between the standing teachers and parent volunteers. After assembly, Morrison watched as Charlotte made her way to her first class, mathematics with Mrs. Henderson. The group of older students seemed to be following the same route, and Morrison's concern grew. These weren't Charlotte's usual classmates. They were Year 6 students, at least 2 years older and significantly bigger than the princess. The leader of the group was a girl named Sophia Hartwell, whose parents were prominent London socialites. She had the kind of confidence that came from never being told no, and the sharp tongue that often accompanied privilege without responsibility. Flanking her were 2 other girls, Emma and Lucy, who seemed to orbit Sophia like satellites, feeding off her energy and validation. As Charlotte settled into her seat near the window, Morrison took his position in the corridor outside the classroom. Through the small window in the door, he could see Charlotte attempting to focus on her math worksheet, but her attention kept drifting to the doorway where Sophia's group had gathered. During the break between classes, Morrison's worst fears were confirmed. He was positioned near the water fountains when he saw Charlotte approaching, her water bottle in hand. She moved with the careful grace that had been instilled in her from birth, but there was something subdued about her usual bright energy. "Oh, look, it's Princess Perfect," Sophia's voice carried clearly across the corridor, causing several other students to turn and look. "Does your mummy still dress you in the morning, Your Highness?" Charlotte's cheeks flushed pink, but she kept walking toward the water fountain. Morrison's jaw tightened, but he remained still. Royal protection protocol was clear: intervene only if there was a physical threat. Emotional threats, unfortunately, were considered part of normal childhood development, even for royals. "I heard she can't even ride a bike without training wheels," Emma chimed in, her voice loud enough to ensure maximum embarrassment. "Isn't that right, Princess Baby?" Morrison watched as Charlotte's hand trembled slightly while filling her water bottle. Other students in the corridor had stopped their conversations and were now openly staring. Some looked sympathetic, others curious, and a few seemed to be enjoying the drama unfolding before them. "My grandmother says your family is just for show," Sophia continued, stepping closer to Charlotte. "Bet you don't actually do anything important. You just wave and smile and spend taxpayer money on fancy clothes." This comment hit differently. Morrison could see it in the way Charlotte's entire posture changed. Her shoulders squared, and when she turned around to face her tormentors, her blue eyes held a spark that Morrison had never seen before. "That's not true," Charlotte said quietly, but her voice carried a strength that surprised everyone present, including Morrison. "My family works very hard to help people." Sophia laughed, a sound that echoed harshly off the corridor walls. "Help people? By living in palaces and being waited on hand and foot? Please. My father says your whole family is just expensive decoration." Morrison took a small step closer. He could intervene now if he wanted to, create a distraction, suggest Charlotte was needed elsewhere. But something in the young princess's stance told him she didn't want rescuing. She wanted to fight. "Your father doesn't know what he's talking about," Charlotte replied, her voice growing stronger. "My mother visits hospitals and helps sick children. My father works with homeless people and teaches them new skills. My grandfather has spent his whole life protecting the environment." "What does your father do besides complain?" The corridor had gone completely silent. Even the teachers who had been chatting near the staff room had turned to watch. Morrison felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. Charlotte was holding her own, but he knew from experience that cornered bullies often escalated. Sophia's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone younger than herself. "How dare you talk about my father like that? You're nothing special. You're just a little girl who got lucky being born into the right family." "Maybe," Charlotte said, taking a step closer to Sophia despite the height difference. "But at least I don't need to pick on other people to feel important." Morrison's hand moved instinctively toward his radio. The situation was escalating, and while there was no physical threat yet, he could see the anger building in Sophia's expression. Other students had begun forming a loose circle around the confrontation, sensing drama. Lucy, who had been quiet until now, decided to join the attack. "Everyone knows you're not even that pretty. And you're definitely not as smart as you think you are. I bet you can't even spell responsibility without help." Charlotte's response surprised everyone, including Morrison. Instead of getting angry or upset, she smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile, but rather the confident expression of someone who had just realized they held all the cards. "Responsibility," Charlotte spelled clearly, pausing between each letter for emphasis. "It's something you learn when people actually expect things from you, instead of just handing you everything you want." Morrison had to suppress a grin. The princess had just delivered what military personnel might call a precision strike. Accurate, devastating, and impossible to counter. The bell rang for the next period, and Morrison watched as students began dispersing. Sophia and her friends walked away muttering among themselves, clearly plotting their next move. Charlotte stood alone by the water fountain for a moment, her brave facade finally cracking slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. She looked around and caught Morrison's eye. He gave her a subtle nod of approval and watched as a small smile played at the corners of her mouth. She straightened her blazer once more and headed toward her next class with renewed confidence. But Morrison knew this was far from over. In his years of protection work, he had learned that bullies rarely gave up after one defeat. They regrouped, recruited allies, and came back harder. As he followed Charlotte at his usual distance, he found himself not just protecting a princess, but watching a young warrior discover her strength. The rest of the morning passed quietly, but Morrison remained alert. During lunch, he positioned himself where he could observe the dining hall while maintaining his discreet distance. Charlotte sat with her usual group of friends, kind, genuine children who seemed unaware of her royal status most of the time. They laughed and shared stories, and for a brief moment, Morrison saw Charlotte relax completely. But across the dining hall, Sophia's table was buzzing with whispered conversations and occasional glances toward Charlotte. Morrison's instincts told him the next attack was being planned, and it would likely be more sophisticated than a simple corridor confrontation. As Charlotte finished her lunch and prepared for afternoon classes, Morrison caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. Sophia was showing something on her phone to her friends, and they were all laughing while looking in Charlotte's direction. In today's digital age, Morrison knew that the most dangerous weapons weren't physical. They were social. The afternoon would bring new challenges, and Morrison sensed that Charlotte's real test was yet to come. But as he watched her walk confidently toward her next class, her head held high despite the morning's confrontation, he couldn't help but think that perhaps the world was about to witness something remarkable. The young girl who had entered school that morning feeling uncertain about her place was beginning to transform into something much more powerful. The question wasn't whether Charlotte would face more challenges, it was whether she would continue to rise to meet them. Morrison adjusted his position and continued his vigilant watch, knowing that the most important moments in a person's character development often happened when they thought no one was looking. Today, someone was definitely looking, and what he was seeing filled him with both pride and anticipation for what would come next. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of Lambrook School, casting long shadows across the corridor as students moved between classes. Detective Inspector Morrison had positioned himself near the art room, where Princess Charlotte was scheduled for her favorite subject of the day. Through years of observation, he had learned that Charlotte's true personality emerged most clearly when she was engaged in creative activities. As Charlotte entered the art room with her classmates, Morrison noticed she seemed lighter somehow. The morning's confrontation appeared to have lifted a weight from her shoulders rather than adding to it. She chatted easily with her friend Amelia about their upcoming project, a collaborative mural about environmental conservation that would be displayed in the school's main hallway. Mrs. Patterson, the art teacher, was known for her ability to create a safe, nurturing environment where students could express themselves freely. She had taught at Lambrook for 15 years and had worked with several children from prominent families, always maintaining the perfect balance of respect and normalcy that allowed them to simply be children. Today, we're going to work on adding the final details to our environmental mural, Patterson announced to the class. Remember, this will be seen by everyone who enters our school, so let's make sure it represents our very best work and our genuine hopes for the planet's future. Charlotte's eyes lit up as she took her place at the large table where the mural was spread out. The piece depicted a world where nature and human innovation worked in harmony. Solar panels shaped like flower petals, wind turbines that looked like graceful dancers, and children of all backgrounds playing in green spaces filled with thriving wildlife. Morrison watched through the classroom window as Charlotte carefully added delicate brushstrokes to a section showing children planting trees. Her concentration was complete, and the gentle smile on her face reflected the peace she found in creative expression. For these precious moments, she wasn't a princess with royal duties and public scrutiny. She was simply an 8-year-old girl doing what she loved most. "Charlotte, your technique with the detail work is really improving," Mrs. Patterson observed, stopping beside her student. "The way you've captured the light filtering through the leaves is quite sophisticated for your age group." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson," Charlotte replied, adding a tiny bird to one of her painted trees. "I want people to see how beautiful nature can be when we take care of it properly. My father always says that we're not just borrowing the earth from our parents, we're borrowing it from our children."
Morrison felt a familiar surge of pride.
Even in casual conversation, Charlotte's deep thinking and genuine concern for others shone through. These were the moments that reminded him why his job was about much more than just physical protection. He was helping to safeguard someone who might one day make a real difference in the world. But his moment of reflection was interrupted by a commotion in the corridor outside. Through the art room's open door, he could hear raised voices and what sounded like a crowd gathering. Morrison's training kicked in immediately, and he moved closer to investigate while keeping Charlotte in his peripheral vision. What he found in the corridor made his jaw clench with anger and concern. Sophia Hartwell and her friends had gathered a crowd of students around them, and they were passing around a tablet, encouraging everyone to look at whatever was displayed on the screen. The mixture of gasps, giggles, and whispered comments told Morrison everything he needed to know. This was a coordinated attack designed for maximum social damage. "Did you see this?" Sophia was saying loudly, making sure her voice carried into nearby classrooms. Someone posted the most ridiculous video of Princess Perfect trying to play football during PE yesterday. She's absolutely terrible. She can barely kick the ball straight, and when she fell in the mud, she cried like a baby. Morrison's mind raced. He knew there had been no official filming during PE classes, which meant someone had secretly recorded Charlotte without permission. This wasn't just bullying anymore, it was a potential security breach and definitely a violation of the school's strict policies regarding privacy and recording. Inside the art room, Charlotte had gone completely still. Morrison could see her hand frozen mid-brushstroke as the cruel laughter from the corridor reached her ears. Other students in the art class had begun whispering among themselves, and several were craning their necks to see what was happening outside. Mrs. Patterson noticed the disruption immediately and moved toward the door, but before she could act, something extraordinary happened. Charlotte calmly set down her paintbrush, wiped her hands on her apron, and stood up from her seat. "Mrs. Patterson," Charlotte said clearly, her voice carrying a maturity that seemed far beyond her 8 years.
May I please step outside for a moment? I think there's something I need to address.
Morrison felt his protective instincts surge. Every fiber of his training told him to intervene, to create a distraction that would allow Charlotte to avoid this confrontation. But something in her posture, the straight spine, the lifted chin, the steady gaze, told him that intervention might rob her of a crucial moment in her own development. Mrs. Patterson looked concerned but nodded slowly. "Of course, Charlotte. Would you like me to come with you?"
Thank you, but I think this is something I need to handle myself,
Charlotte replied, already moving toward the door with quiet determination. Morrison positioned himself strategically as Charlotte stepped into the corridor. The crowd of students had grown larger, with some standing on tiptoes to get a better view of whatever was on Sophia's tablet. When Charlotte appeared, a hush fell over the group, the kind of silence that precedes either flight or fight. Sophia, emboldened by her audience and the apparent success of her digital ambush, held the tablet higher. "Oh, look! Here's our star athlete herself! Did you want to see your amazing performance from yesterday's PE class? I think the whole school should appreciate your athletic talents." Charlotte walked directly toward Sophia, not hurrying but moving with purpose. When she was close enough to see the tablet screen, Morrison watched her face carefully. Instead of the hurt or anger he expected to see, Charlotte's expression remained remarkably calm. "You're right, Sophia," Charlotte said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm not very good at football. I'm probably one of the worst players in my year group." This unexpected response seemed to catch Sophia off guard. She had clearly been prepared for tears, anger, or denial, not honest acknowledgement. Charlotte continued, her voice growing stronger. "I'm also not very good at cricket, or tennis, or most sports, really. I'm much better at art, and reading, and learning about history and science. We all have different talents, don't we?" Morrison could see confusion spreading through the crowd. This wasn't going the way anyone had expected, including him. "But here's what I find interesting," Charlotte went on, taking another step closer to Sophia. "You spent your time yesterday secretly filming me instead of focusing on your own performance. And you spent this morning editing that video and sharing it with people, trying to make me feel bad about myself. That must have taken quite a bit of effort." Sophia's confident smirk was beginning to falter. "I was just showing people the truth about their precious princess," she said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "The truth," Charlotte repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, let's talk about truth. The truth is that I'm not perfect at everything. The truth is that I sometimes struggle, and yes, sometimes I cry when I'm frustrated. But the truth is also that I keep trying, even when I'm not good at something. I don't give up, and I don't try to make others feel small just to make myself feel bigger." Morrison watched as several students in the crowd began shifting uncomfortably. Charlotte's words were hitting their mark not just with Sophia, but with everyone present. "And here's another truth," Charlotte continued, her blue eyes meeting Sophia's directly. "Recording someone without their permission and sharing it to embarrass them isn't just mean. It's actually against the law. It's also against every rule this school has about respect and kindness." Mrs. Patterson, who had been listening from the art room doorway, stepped forward at this point. "Charlotte is absolutely right," she said firmly. "Sophia, please hand me that tablet immediately. What you've done today is completely unacceptable and will need to be addressed with your parents and the headmaster." Sophia looked around desperately, searching for support from her friends or the crowd, But the mood had shifted completely. Students were beginning to disperse, some looking ashamed of their participation in the cruel entertainment. "This isn't over," Sophia whispered to Charlotte as she reluctantly handed over the tablet to Mrs. Patterson. Charlotte's response surprised Morrison once again. Instead of threatening back or showing fear, she simply nodded calmly. "You're right. It's not over," Charlotte said. "Because tomorrow I'll still be here, still trying my best at everything I do, still treating people with kindness even when they don't treat me the same way. The question is, what kind of person will you choose to be tomorrow?" Morrison had seen many confrontations in his career, but he had never witnessed anything quite like this. Charlotte hadn't just defended herself, she had done it with a grace and wisdom that would have impressed adults, let alone children. She had turned a moment of potential humiliation into a lesson about resilience, dignity, and moral courage. As the crowd finally dispersed and Charlotte returned to the art room, Morrison found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about the young princess. This wasn't just a child who happened to be born into royalty. This was someone with the potential to redefine what royal leadership could look like in the modern world. Inside the art room, Charlotte picked up her paintbrush and continued working on her mural as if nothing had happened. But Morrison could see the slight tremor in her hands that revealed the emotional cost of her brave stand. When Amelia quietly asked if she was okay, Charlotte simply nodded and said, "Sometimes standing up for what's right is hard, but it's always worth doing." As the art class continued, Morrison reflected on what he had witnessed. Charlotte had faced a sophisticated attack designed to cause maximum social damage, and she had not only survived it but had transformed it into a teaching moment for everyone involved. She had shown courage, wisdom, and compassion in equal measure. But perhaps most importantly, she had shown that true strength wasn't about never falling down or never being imperfect. It was about how you responded when others tried to use your imperfections against you. Morrison realized he wasn't just watching a princess anymore. He was watching the early development of a leader who might one day change the world. The afternoon sun continued to stream through the windows as Charlotte added finishing touches to her painted trees. But something fundamental had shifted. The uncertain little girl who had walked into school that morning was still there, but she was now accompanied by something new, an unshakable core of inner strength that would serve her well in all the challenges yet to come. The final period of the day found Princess Charlotte in her history class, where Mr. Thornfield was leading a discussion about historical leaders who had faced adversity with courage. The irony wasn't lost on Detective Inspector Morrison, who had positioned himself where he could observe both the classroom and the corridor beyond. After the afternoon's confrontation, he expected Sophia and her allies to make one final attempt at retaliation before the school day ended. Charlotte sat attentively. As Mr. Peters saw, thus, Thornfield spoke about Queen Elizabeth I, who had ruled during a time when female leadership was questioned and challenged at every turn. The lesson focused on how the young queen had transformed criticism and doubt into sources of strength, ultimately becoming one of England's most successful monarchs. Leadership isn't about being perfect, Mr. Thornfield explained to his class of attentive 8- and 9-year-olds. It's about how you handle imperfection, how you respond to criticism, and whether you can stay true to your values even when it's difficult. Morrison noticed Charlotte's posture straighten slightly at these words. She had been quietly processing the day's events, and he could see her mind working to understand not just what had happened, but what it meant for her future interactions and personal development. "Miss Charlotte," Mr. Thornfield said, "can you think of any modern examples of leaders who have faced public criticism but continued to do what they believed was right?" Charlotte considered the question carefully before responding. "I think my grandmother, the late Queen, faced criticism sometimes, but she always kept working to help people. Even when newspapers wrote mean things about our family, she continued visiting hospitals and meeting with world leaders and supporting charities." "That's an excellent example," Mr. Thornfield agreed. The late Queen understood that leadership sometimes means accepting unfair criticism while staying focused on your responsibilities to others. Morrison watched as several students nodded thoughtfully. The lesson was clearly resonating, not just with Charlotte but with many of her classmates who had witnessed the day's events. There was something powerful about connecting historical lessons to present-day experiences, especially when those experiences involved courage and character development. As the class continued, Morrison noticed unusual activity in the corridor. A small group of younger students, probably year 3 or year 4, were gathered near the lockers, whispering urgently among themselves. These weren't the usual suspects from Sophia's circle. These were children who typically minded their own business and stayed out of drama. His attention sharpened when he recognized one of them, Timothy Wells, a quiet boy from Charlotte's year who struggled with a severe stutter. Morrison had observed him being teased occasionally by other students, though never by Charlotte, who always spoke to him patiently and kindly. Through the classroom window, Morrison watched as Timothy approached the history room door with obvious nervousness. He waited until Mr. Thornfield paused in his lesson, then knocked softly. "Excuse me, sir," Timothy said, his words careful and measured as he managed his stutter. "May I please speak with Charlotte for a moment? It's quite important." Mr. Thornfield looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, Timothy. Charlotte, you may step outside for a moment." Morrison positioned himself closer as Charlotte joined Timothy in the corridor. The small group of younger students had formed a protective semicircle around them, and Morrison could see the determination in their young faces despite their obvious nervousness. "Charlotte," Timothy began, taking a deep breath to manage his speech carefully, "we wanted you to know that we saw what happened today, with Sophia and the others, and we think what you did was really brave." Charlotte looked touched but also curious about why Timothy and his friends had sought her out specifically. "But there's something else," continued a girl Morrison recognized as Sarah Chen, one of the kindest students in year 4. "Sophia and her friends have been planning something bigger for tomorrow. They're trying to get older students from other schools involved, and they're planning to post more videos online." Morrison's blood ran cold. This had escalated far beyond typical school bullying into something that could have serious implications for Charlotte's safety and privacy, not to mention her family's security protocols. Charlotte's expression grew serious. "What kind of videos?" Timothy struggled with his next words but pushed through with impressive determination. "They recorded you during lunch yesterday, too, when you were helping clean up after that year 2 student spilled his tray. They made it look like you were just doing it for attention, for the cameras, but we know you always help people, even when no one's watching." Morrison's mind raced through the implications. Multiple unauthorized recordings, potential social media campaigns, involvement of external students. This was no longer a matter of childhood conflict. This was harassment with potentially serious consequences, and it needed immediate adult intervention. But before Morrison could step in, Charlotte did something that once again surprised everyone present. "Thank you for telling me this," she said to Timothy and his friends. "That took real courage, and I want you to know how much I appreciate it. But I have an idea, and I think you might be able to help me." Morrison moved closer, intrigued despite his concern. Charlotte looked at each of the younger students in turn. "Instead of trying to stop them from making more videos, what if we made our own video? A real one that shows what actually happens here at school every day?" Sarah tilted her head curiously. "What do you mean?" "I mean a video about all the good things that happen here that nobody ever talks about," Charlotte explained, her voice growing more excited as the idea developed. "Like how Marcus always shares his lunch with students who forget theirs, or how Emma tutors younger students who are struggling with reading, or how Timothy here gave his own art supplies to that new student who couldn't afford them." Morrison watched as the younger students' faces lit up with understanding and enthusiasm. Charlotte wasn't just defending herself. She was creating a counter-narrative that highlighted the positive values and behaviors that actually dominated their school community. "But where would we show it?" asked another boy Morrison didn't recognize. Charlotte smiled. "Leave that part to me. I think I know someone who might be able to help us reach the right audience." Morrison realized she was probably thinking of her parents' communications team, who were experts at managing public narratives and social media presence. The princess was thinking strategically, several steps ahead of her opponents. "There's just one thing," Charlotte continued, her expression growing serious. "If we do this, it has to be genuine. We can't make up stories or exaggerate things just to make ourselves look good. The truth is powerful enough on its own." Timothy nodded eagerly. "We can ask Mrs. Patterson if we can use the video equipment from the media studies room. She's always encouraging students to document their creative projects. And we can ask Mr. Rodriguez if some of his older students want to help with the technical parts," Sarah added. They're really good with editing and sound. Morrison watched this impromptu planning session with growing amazement. Charlotte had taken what could have been a devastating attack on her reputation and turned it into an opportunity to showcase the best aspects of her school community. More importantly, she was doing it in a way that empowered other students and celebrated their contributions rather than focusing solely on defending herself. "When should we start?" asked another student. Charlotte considered this carefully. "Tomorrow morning, before school officially starts, we can meet in the media room and begin documenting all the positive things that happen throughout the day. But remember, we're not doing this to get back at anyone. We're doing this because these stories deserve to be told." As the group began to disperse, Timothy hung back for a moment. "Charlotte," he said, managing his words with careful precision, "you didn't have to include us in this. Most older students don't really notice us." Charlotte's response made Morrison's chest tighten with pride. "Timothy, you noticed that I needed help, and you were brave enough to come and tell me, even though it wasn't easy for you. That makes you exactly the kind of person whose story should be told. You're not invisible to me, and you shouldn't be invisible to anyone else either." As Charlotte returned to her history class, Morrison reflected on the remarkable transformation he had witnessed over the course of a single day. The uncertain little girl from the morning had become someone who not only stood up for herself, but lifted others up in the process. She had faced cruelty with kindness, responded to attack with creativity, and turned a potential crisis into an opportunity for positive change. But Morrison also knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. Sophia and her allies wouldn't give up easily, and the involvement of older students from other schools introduced variables that were harder to predict and control. Charlotte's plan was brilliant, but it would require careful execution and probably some adult guidance to ensure everyone's safety. As the final bell rang and students began gathering their belongings, Morrison made a mental note to have a discreet conversation with the school administration that evening. Charlotte's courage and leadership were inspiring, but she was still an 8-year-old child who needed appropriate support and protection. Watching Charlotte pack her school bag with the same careful attention she brought to everything else, Morrison realized he was witnessing something historically significant. This wasn't just a story about a princess learning to handle bullies. This was the origin story of a leader who might one day change how the world thought about power, influence, and social responsibility. The young warrior princess had been born today, but her real journey was just beginning. Tomorrow would test not only her resolve, but her ability to inspire others to be their best selves. Morrison had a feeling that everyone, students, teachers, parents, and perhaps even the wider world, was about to learn something important about the true nature of strength and leadership. As Charlotte walked toward the exit with her friends, chatting enthusiastically about their plans for the next day, Morrison followed at his usual respectful distance. But for the first time in his career as a royal protection officer, he felt less like a guardian and more like a witness to history in the making. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the school grounds as Charlotte climbed into the car that would take her home to Kensington Palace. But Morrison knew that the real palace where she would learn to rule, the place where she would develop the character and wisdom that would define her future leadership, was right here at Lambrook School, in the daily interactions with classmates who challenged her, supported her, and ultimately helped her discover who she was meant to become. The next morning arrived with an unusual energy at Lambrook School. Detective Inspector Morrison noticed it immediately as he accompanied Princess Charlotte through the main entrance. Students were arriving earlier than usual, many carrying cameras, notebooks, and art supplies. Word about Charlotte's counter-narrative project had spread through the informal networks that all school communities possess. Charlotte herself seemed transformed from the uncertain girl of just 24 hours earlier. She walked with quiet confidence, greeting other students warmly and moving through the halls with the natural authority of someone who had discovered her own voice. Morrison observed her interactions carefully, noting how other children responded to this new version of the princess, with respect, curiosity, and something that looked remarkably like inspiration. The media studies room had been unlocked early by Mrs. Patterson, who had stayed after school the previous evening to prepare equipment and ensure everything was ready for the students' ambitious project. When Charlotte arrived, she found Timothy, Sarah, and nearly a dozen other students already assembled, their faces bright with excitement and determination. "Good morning, everyone," Charlotte said, setting down her school bag and surveying the group. "Before we start, I want to make sure we all understand what we're doing here. We're not making this video to hurt anyone or to get revenge. We're making it because there are wonderful things happening in our school every day that deserve to be celebrated. Morrison watched from his position near the doorway as Charlotte naturally took on a leadership role, but in a way that invited collaboration rather than demanding obedience. She had clearly thought deeply about the project overnight and had developed a clear vision for how it should unfold. "I've spoken with my parents," Charlotte continued, "and they've agreed to help us share our video with a wider audience, but only if we create something that truly represents our school community's values. That means we need to be honest, kind, and fair in everything we document." Timothy raised his hand slightly. "What about Sophia and her friends? Should we avoid filming them completely?" Charlotte's answer revealed the depth of her moral thinking. "We film everyone who's doing positive things, regardless of whether they've been kind to us personally. If Sophia helps someone or does something good, we include it. If she doesn't, we don't seek her out, but we don't actively avoid her either. We focus on the positive behaviors we want to encourage, not on the people we might have personal issues with." Morrison felt a surge of professional pride. Charlotte was demonstrating the kind of strategic thinking and ethical clarity that he had seen in the most effective leaders throughout his career. But she was also showing something more rare: the wisdom to separate personal feelings from principled action. Mrs. Patterson entered the room carrying additional equipment and was clearly impressed by what she found. "It's wonderful to see so many students here early, ready to work on something positive," she said. "I've prepared several cameras and basic editing software. Who has experience with video production?" Several older students raised their hands, and Charlotte immediately deferred to their expertise. "Marcus has made several short films for his family," she said. "And Jessica won the Year 6 documentary competition last term. I think they should lead the technical aspects while we focus on finding the stories we want to tell." This delegation of authority impressed Morrison even more than Charlotte's earlier demonstrations of courage. True leadership wasn't about doing everything yourself. It was about recognizing other people's strengths and empowering them to contribute their best work. As the group organized itself into teams, camera operators, story researchers, editors, and coordinators, Morrison noticed how Charlotte moved between groups, offering encouragement and asking thoughtful questions rather than giving orders. She was learning to lead by facilitating others' success rather than commanding their obedience. The first story they documented emerged organically during morning break. Sarah had noticed that Mrs. Chen, the elderly crossing guard, was struggling with a heavy bag while helping students cross the busy road outside the school. Without being prompted, 3 different students had immediately moved to help her, carrying her bag and ensuring she had everything she needed before thanking her for keeping them safe every day. "That," Charlotte said to Timothy, who was operating the camera, "is exactly what we want to show people. Students who help others without being asked, without expecting recognition, just because it's the right thing to do." Morrison watched the easy collaboration between Charlotte and her team with growing admiration. The princess had created an environment where every student felt valued and empowered to contribute, regardless of their age or social status within the school hierarchy. But the real test came during lunch period, when Sophia Hartwell and her friends made their anticipated appearance. They had clearly planned another public confrontation, this time with reinforcements. Several older students from the local secondary school had arrived to support them, armed with phones and obvious intentions to create content for social media. Morrison's hand moved instinctively toward his radio, but Charlotte's reaction stopped him cold. Instead of showing fear or anger when she spotted the group approaching, Charlotte simply continued her conversation with the documentary team about their afternoon filming schedule. "Charlotte," Sophia called out loudly, ensuring maximum attention from the lunch crowd. "I see you're still playing pretend with your little film project. Do you really think anyone cares about your make-believe stories?" Charlotte looked up calmly, acknowledging Sophia's presence without showing any signs of intimidation. "Hello, Sophia. We're documenting the positive things that happen in our school community every day. Would you like to be part of that?" This response clearly wasn't what Sophia had expected. She had come prepared for confrontation, not invitation. "I'm not interested in your propaganda project," Sophia replied, but her voice lacked its usual sharp edge. The presence of the cameras and the documentary team had changed the dynamic, making her appear more like a disruptor than a leader. "That's perfectly fine," Charlotte said pleasantly. Everyone gets to choose how they want to be remembered. Morrison watched as one of the older students who had come to support Sophia began looking uncomfortable. The princess's refusal to engage in conflict was making their planned disruption look petty and unnecessary. But then something extraordinary happened. Emma, one of Sophia's usual allies, broke away from the group and approached Charlotte hesitantly. "Charlotte," Emma said quietly, "I wanted to apologize for yesterday. What we did with the video wasn't right, and I'm sorry I was part of it." Charlotte's response revealed the true measure of her character growth. Instead of accepting the apology grudgingly, or using it as an opportunity to make Emma feel worse, she smiled warmly and said, "Thank you for saying that, Emma. It takes courage to admit when we've made mistakes. Would you like to help us with the documentary? We could really use someone with your creativity." Morrison had to consciously keep his expression neutral as he watched Emma's face light up with surprise and gratitude. Charlotte wasn't just forgiving her former tormentor. She was actively including her in the positive project, transforming an enemy into an ally through simple kindness and moral leadership. The effect on the watching crowd was electric. Students who had been prepared to witness another confrontation instead saw grace, forgiveness, and invitation. Several more of Sophia's supporters began drifting away, their enthusiasm for conflict dampened by Charlotte's unexpected response. Sophia herself was left in an increasingly isolated position. Her planned disruption had become a demonstration of her own inability to respond constructively when offered peace instead of war. "This isn't over," Sophia muttered, but the words carried no real threat. She was no longer the leader of a movement. She was a single student clinging to a grudge that no longer served any purpose. As Sophia and her remaining supporters retreated, Charlotte immediately turned her attention back to the documentary project, treating the interruption as nothing more than a minor distraction from more important work. The afternoon brought a series of remarkable discoveries as the documentary team spread throughout the school, capturing moments of kindness, creativity, and community that occurred naturally when students thought no one was watching. They filmed Year 6 students reading to reception children, captured moments of peer tutoring in mathematics, documented the weekly visits to the local elderly care facility that students organized themselves, and recorded interviews with teachers about why they chose to work at Lanbrook. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when Timothy overcame his stutter to deliver an on-camera testimony about how Charlotte's kindness had helped him gain confidence in speaking publicly. His words were halting but heartfelt, and Morrison could see tears in Charlotte's eyes as she listened to her classmate describe how her patient friendship had changed his experience at school. "Charlotte never makes me feel bad about my stutter," Timothy said to the camera, his determination to share his story overcoming his speech difficulties. "She always waits for me to finish my thoughts, and she includes me in conversations even when it takes me longer to participate. That's taught me that being different doesn't mean being less valuable." Morrison realized he was witnessing something that would resonate far beyond the walls of Lanbrook School. This wasn't just a story about a princess learning to handle bullies. It was a demonstration of how individual acts of kindness and moral courage could transform entire communities. As the school day ended and students began uploading and editing their footage, Morrison reflected on the complete transformation he had witnessed over just 2 days. Charlotte had evolved from an uncertain child seeking her place in the world to a natural leader who inspired others through example rather than authority. But more importantly, she had learned that true strength wasn't about defeating enemies. It was about transforming them into allies through persistent kindness and unwavering commitment to positive values. The final piece of the documentary came together that evening, when Mrs. Patterson and the older students worked with professional editors recommended by the Prince and Princess of Wales to create a polished but authentic representation of life at Lanbrook School. The video showcased not just individual acts of kindness, but the culture of mutual support and respect that made such acts possible. When the documentary was released the following week, it became an international sensation. But for Morrison, the real victory wasn't the positive media coverage or the messages of support that poured in from around the world. The real victory was watching Charlotte walk through the halls of Lanbrook School with quiet confidence, surrounded by friends who valued her not for her title, but for her character. Sophia Hartwell eventually apologized publicly and became one of Charlotte's most vocal supporters. Emma became a close friend and co-leader of several school service projects. Timothy's confidence soared, and he eventually became head of the school's public speaking club. But perhaps most importantly, the culture of the entire school shifted. Students who had previously ignored acts of bullying began speaking up to protect vulnerable classmates. Teachers reported higher levels of cooperation and mutual support in their classrooms. Parents commented on how their children talked more openly about kindness and moral courage at home. Morrison continued to serve as Charlotte's protection officer, but his role evolved as well. He was no longer just protecting a princess, he was helping to safeguard someone whose influence extended far beyond royal protocol and state functions. Charlotte had discovered that her true power lay not in her birthright, but in her ability to inspire others to be their best selves. Years later, when historians would study the development of Charlotte's leadership style, they would trace it back to these crucial days at Lambrook School. They would note how a young girl's response to bullying had demonstrated principles that would guide her throughout her life. The power of persistent kindness, the strength found in vulnerable honesty, the wisdom of transforming enemies into allies, and the revolutionary idea that true leadership means empowering others to discover their own capacity for positive change. The warrior princess had indeed been born during those pivotal days, but she was a warrior armed with compassion rather than conflict, fighting for inclusion rather than victory, and building a legacy based on love rather than conquest. Morrison knew he had been privileged to witness not just the development of a future queen, but the emergence of a leader who would redefine what royal service could mean in the modern world.